Hello everyone. Before the video begins, I just need to make a slight correction here. So I just edited the video and I believe I forgot to mention where our command is actually registered. We're doing this in side proxy under server started, where we're taking the FML server starting event, and that's where you want to register the command. Everything else should be in the one source file that we create throughout the episode. So just don't forget to actually register your command and enjoy the episode. Hello everyone and welcome back. So today I'm going to be going over creating a command. And this is something that has changed significantly in 1.13. So with 1.13, Mojang introduced, I believe it was their first open source library. We've got Brigadier. And this is what Minecraft's command system is built on top of. This is open source, MIT licensed, so you could use it for anything potentially. We're going to be using this for Minecraft modding. And before I look at that a little bit more, I want to just show something here. So I think I mentioned previous episode, one thing that you'll often do to figure out how something works or how you might do something is to look at something similar. And unfortunately, the code for commands, as it's been decompiled by for our development environment, is not the easiest thing to read, as you could see in that first method up there. That's just, I mean, if you look at that, it's not at all obvious what's going on. And we'll be getting into that in just a moment. So I guess I should have mentioned the plan for today is to create a sort of dumbed down version of the give command. It's not going to have NBT support because we're going to be swapping out one of the arguments for a different type, and that's just because of something I want to demonstrate. And I will show you how I've been formatting my code for my commands, which makes them easier to read. And the Brigadier GitHub also has an example, which is down here. So I don't know how, let me see if I can bump the size up on that a little bit. So after I looked at this, it made it much clearer what exactly is going on. So we're essentially creating a tree-like structure with a series of chained and nested method calls. It is the best way to describe it, I suppose. So in this case, you can see we're starting with a literal, which means that you literally type that. And then the then method means that we're chaining something onto that. So we've got an argument that comes right after that. And then after the argument is typed, that executes some code. But if this argument is not included, we've also got something down here where we're executing another block of code. So if you format the code correctly, it makes it a little bit more obvious as to what's going on, and I don't know if they've explained this command exactly. Yeah, so there's essentially two commands here, foo and foobar. So this example is fairly simple, but it's enough to kind of get a grasp on what exactly is going on. So our goal for today is going to be to essentially rewrite this in a way that makes a little bit more sense and modify it slightly. And I'm also going to want to copy this method because I don't want to rewrite all of that. I'll make a mistake with it. Okay, so going back to our command, I've already created it in a new package called command. And this class currently has one method, which is just a static register method. It takes a parameter of type command dispatcher of command source. And you'll note the command dispatcher is from Brigadier. The command source is actually from Minecraft. I don't know if I've ever looked at the command source code, but it has a way to get the sender, which is typically player, I believe. I don't know, we'll be getting back into that. Yeah, it just occurred to me I've never actually looked at the code for command source. I've just always used the suggestions that pop up. Alright, so let's go ahead and paste that copied method in. And I'm going to change a couple... I need to change one thing in the method signature. I'm going to change the item input to a resource location. Call that item ID. And we're going to need to get the item from that item ID, which may not even be valid. So let's start by getting the item. So that'll be forgeregistries.items.getValue, and then pass that the item ID. Then let's say if the item is null, then we're going to want to send an error message. So using the command source that we have here, we can call send error message. And typically you would want to translate this from a localization file, which is something that we haven't actually talked about, but normally you would use a text component translation. I'm just going to use a string text component. And let's say item ID does not exist. And then we'll return 0. I don't actually know what the return values are used for, if anything, but it seems like typically if a command is successful, it returns a non-zero. So kind of the reverse of what you might expect. Okay, so now we need to fix the errors down here. We can replace that with just item. And this will be new item stack, item j, and get rid of the boolean. And we can get rid of this redundant cast. That you'll see a lot of redundant cast whenever you have when you're looking at the decompiled code. And yeah, this line is very long. Playing sound effects is fun. But yeah, I'll go ahead and just break this up a little bit. So these three parameters are the position the sound occurs, that's the sound effect, that's the sound category, which affects volume. That parameter is the bass volume, and then that one is the pitch, which you can see is randomized to some extent. Many sound effects are like that, they'll have a slightly randomized pitch. Okay, and then down here, it's calling send feedback, so similar to the send error message we called before, except that this is not an error, it's just providing feedback of what the command has done. And we actually need to fix these as well. Is there a way I could select both of those at once? I don't think that would work. Or maybe it would. Okay. So what I did there is I just did a middle click and drag, and that lets you select text in a column select mode, so you can edit multiple lines at the same time. Very useful trick. Not all editors have that feature. IntelliJ does. Visual Studio Code does. I don't know about Eclipse. So we can see we got a little warning here about item.getMaxStackSize being deprecated. I don't believe that's anything to worry about. So you use item stack sensitive version. Okay. In this case, this is fine. A lot of times you'll see deprecated methods in item, and it's more of a warning that this may not be the best method to use, but sometimes it is the one you need. Okay, so let's get to writing our actual command here. So we're going to call dispatch.register. And we're going to start with commands.literal. And we'll call our command sgive, just for simple give. Now we're also going to set a permission level, so that's requires. And that is a predicate of command source, so we'll say source dot has permission level, and most commands will be permission level 2. Okay, so far we've got a command where you type sgive/sgive, and that's it. Let's go ahead and add a bit more onto that. So first we're going to want to specify the targets. So we're going to do commands.argument. We're going to give our argument a name, just call it targets. This will be displayed to the player when they're typing in the command, and we'll also need this later to actually get the value. And the argument type, we're going to pass in entity argument dot multiple players. Okay, and that's all we need to do for that one. So again, I'm breaking up my code in a way that makes it easier to read. This is all still one statement. You can see there's only a single semicolon in this entire method, and it's going to stay that way. So I guess you could say I'm kind of treating the parentheses sort of like as if they were curly braces. That might be the best way to describe it, except I'm not breaking before like this, which is what the Brigadier GitHub showed. Okay. Actually, I might go ahead and just type it that way since it does make it a bit easier to follow. It's just that it kind of indents way too far afterwards. Then we've got another then, and this is where we're going to deviate a bit from the normal give command, and we're going to pass in a resource location argument. So we're going to call commands.argument again, call it item ID. And this will be resource location argument dot resource location. Okay, and there's actually one other thing I'm going to put here in a minute, but we'll come back to that. So at this point, there's two things that could happen. We've already specified who we're giving the item to and what item we're giving. We have one more argument that we can take, the count of the item, or we can just, at this point, say give everyone who's targeted one of the item. So we're going to need an executes and then a then after it. And these could go in either order. I typically put the execute first. So this takes a command of command source, and let's actually take a look at that. So this is a functional interface. It has a generic type parameter s, and it has one method called run, which takes a parameter of command context of type s. Now, going back to where we were, our s is command source, so this is going to be a command context of command source. So I'm going to go ahead and call this parameter context. And don't really need the curly braces. We're just going to be calling give item. So now this has a few parameters. We need the command source, so we can get that from our context, context.getSource. Our resource location, so we're going to need to get that argument. So resource location argument dot get resource location, and we're going to pass that the context and the argument name, which is item ID. Okay, now we need our targets. So that's going to be entity argument dot get players, passing that the context and our argument name, which is targets. We got one more parameter here, the item count, which in this case is going to be 1. Okay, so now we can put in our count argument, and I'm going to go ahead and copy this since we're going to need more or less the same thing again. So now we're going to be calling then again, and notice that this is on the same level as the executes, because we're essentially branching off at this point. So I'm going to say commands.argument. I'm going to call it count. And this is going to be integer argument type dot integer. And then this is going to execute a very similar block of code, except we're going to replace that one count with our argument. Okay. Now we're more or less done with this. I'm going to go ahead and change these so that it's like I was describing before. Okay, and then Control-Alt-L will format the code, make sure it's all lined up properly. Okay, so we still got this one other thing I want to talk about, but I'm going to go ahead and run this first. I'm not used to using the run anywhere. I was going to do that so I don't have to leave presentation mode. There we go. Run anywhere is just press Control twice, similar to the find anywhere, which is shift twice. Okay, so I did see the deprecation warning about this, which I guess we could suppress that. I'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, so let's take a look at our new command in action. So it'll work as it is, even with that one little piece missing, and I'm going to show what that is. So now we can go ahead and start typing the command name, and Minecraft already knows about it. It understands the different argument types, so this is our targets. So typically you would use @p there. Then we got our item ID, and optionally we can specify the item count as well. Now here's the problem. It's not suggesting anything, like the vanilla give command would. See, it brings up a list of all the items. We can still use this, of course. And I think we can even leave off the Minecraft prefix. Say, give a diamond sword. Give myself 2 of them at once. So, how do we fix it not suggesting items? And this is why I actually changed that argument type, so that we would have to write this part. And this is actually something I've done in 1 or 2 of my mods before. So we're actually going to need a suggestions provider. So I'm going to go ahead and create a field up here. So we'll make that private static final. And this will be a suggestion provider of type command source. And we'll call this item ID suggestions. Now to create this, we're going to use a Lambda expression. It's got 2 parameters, context and builder. And let's take a look at what those are. So that's a command context of command source and a suggestions builder. Let's go ahead and wrap that to the next line. So to create this, we're going to use the iSuggestion provider interface, which has a few helper methods in it. And currently using the default mappings, which don't have name suggestions for any of these. Let's see if I can make that a bit wider. But the one we want is 212476A. You'll notice this method takes a stream of resource location as the first parameter. So if you're using newer mappings, just look for a method with a similar signature right here. So we need a stream of resource locations for our suggestions, and what is that going to be? Well, that's going to be the set of all item IDs, right? So where can we get that? We can get that from forgeregistries.items, and immediately it recommends the method that returns a set of resource location, get keys, and on that we're just going to call .stream. So that produces a stream of resource locations. And the suggestions builder is just going to be builder. Alright, and now let's come down here where I put that to do before. And we're going to say .suggest item ID suggestions. And with that, we'll get a very similar pop-up window, which will suggest all item IDs. And again, the reason I'm doing it this way is there are cases where you might have some collection of something in your mod where you want to use with a command. So you can do something very similar with this. You just get a stream of resource locations and you can feed that to the command. A good example of that is actually in Silent Gear, which has a command which you can use to add and remove parts from the tools. And whenever you get to the part where it wants the part ID, it actually pops up a list of all available parts. Okay, so now let's try our command once more. And as you can see, we got a list of all items. So you can just scroll through this and pick the one you want. Use tab to fill it out. Or like before, you could just fill out or type out part of the name. Then that will filter out the list. So let's actually give more of the blocks we created in the previous episode. So just like that. So I suppose that's all there is to this, really. So it's unfortunate that the vanilla commands are formatted in such a way that they're hard to read, but at the very least, the system itself is easy enough to understand once you get the hang of it. So I've been able to rewrite my commands and create new ones fairly easily. And I'm hoping I can actually open up one of them. And this will be in VS Code, so the text will be smaller. Okay, here we go. So this is the command I was talking about. Let's see if I can... There we go. That's a bit better. So in this case, I actually split it up into a few different statements, just because the indentation was a little bit crazy. And actually, I formatted this one slightly differently, as you can see here. That's not quite how I would normally do that. So maybe not the best example, but you can see I've got a couple of the suggestions providers here, which this one suggests part IDs. And you can see in this case, I've got part manager, which controls all the parts. Then in this case, it doesn't have a get keys, I believe, so I'm actually having to map that out. And this is using the Stream API. I do encourage you to read up on this. It's something I had a bit of trouble getting used to, but it's actually very useful once you get the hang of it. And I don't actually remember what this second suggestion provider is. What is that? Oh, I guess that's, yeah, that's when you're trying to remove parts. It will display a list of what's actually in the tool already. Okay. It's been a while. Let me open up another example here. So scaling health has a couple other commands. Let's open up the difficulty command. So again, I actually saved this literal argument builder so I could just split this up into a few different statements. You can see there's 3 major subcommands here: get, set, and add. And this has an example of getting players as an argument. And you'll notice that would be multiple players. Before, I'm actually using newer mappings here, so some things may have a different name. And in this example, I'm actually, instead of using a Lambda expression, I'm passing in a method reference. And I'm also getting the argument values in here, I believe, in these methods. Right, so like right here, I'm getting a float argument. So that's another way you could potentially do it. Alright, so I think this has gone on long enough, so I'll go ahead and end this here. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like or the dislike button, and subscribe if you haven't already. and I'll see you in the next one.